the failure of the Parks Alliance. And Ildiko Polony, if I'm pronouncing your name right, I hope, is going to tell us who she is, what she's doing, and what the future may hold for the 100 plus nonprofits that have been adversely affected by this happenstance. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me. My name is Ildiko Polony. I'm the executive director of Sutro Stewards, and I'm also the co-chair of the Community Partner Network Advisory Committee, made up of about 60 formerly fiscally sponsored groups by San Francisco Parks Alliance. That was a mouthful. I think everyone knows that San Francisco Parks Alliance folded officially on June 3rd. Um, Everyone probably knows that that happened amid financial scandal. You probably all know that there's been many calls for investigations. Investigations are ongoing. What I'll do, and I'm happy to hear what you all want to hear about, but what I'll do off the top of my head is talk about a little bit about what Sutro Stewards does and the impact we've experienced personally. Talk about the impact I've observed to the city of San Francisco and to other fiscally sponsored groups. Talk about what's happened since SFPA folded and what we're hoping to accomplish, like the work that the advisory committee that I'm a co-chair of is working on. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. If there's anything that you all want to know, like would like me to focus on, you can put it in the chat. I'll talk for like 10 minutes or so. We can also just open it up for questions afterwards and discussion. And I have until about like 6:40, if that works for everyone.
Yeah. That'll be
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Um, so I've been with Sutro Steward since 2020 as the executive director. Has anybody been to Mount Sutro? Everybody's got their cameras off and they're muted. I so much prefer in person doing this in person, but anyway, you can put into the chat whether or not you've been to Mount Sutro. It's about 70 acres of open space in the geographic center of San Francisco. Thanks. The thumbs up, that helps me. Thumbs up, I see that. Thank you. Appreciate it. Um, we manage and maintain and build about 5 acres of, I'm sorry, 5 miles of trail with volunteers, and we maintain about 70 acres of habitat. We have specific habitat sites. So we have a native plant nursery. We grow plants that we collect from seed, from extant populations of native plants that have evolved in San Francisco. We grow those plants in our nursery and then we plant them out in the open space for birds and butterflies and people to enjoy to basically enhance biodiversity. Bring more. I'm looking at a hummingbird outside my window right now, nectaring on a California fuchsia. So that's a perfect example of the relationship between wildlife and plants, and that's part of our mission to conserve and enhance Mount Sutro. So we've been fiscally sponsored by San Francisco Parks Alliance since the beginning of our existence, before it was the official San Francisco Parks Alliance. Our experience with them has been that they have been slow to produce financial records, pretty disorganized, lots of staff turnover. I was always like, should we leave? Maybe get a new fiscal sponsor? It always seemed like a lot of work. And so my strategy, which was probably just as much work, but my strategy was to keep shadow books. And when I noticed that something was incongruent, I would go to the staff and we would resolve it. And sometimes it would take months, but it would get resolved. So when the article came out in the San Francisco Chronicle on April 28th that exposed the depth of the financial problem, my heart sank to the ground. It was both not surprising and an utter total shock. And then I spent the next few days sort of like deeply searching for what to do, because the ramifications of what the Chronicle was reporting seemed like they were going to be real bad. And the conclusion that I came up with, because assuming people are familiar with this dynamic, but because as a fiscally sponsored group, we do not have our own tax status. We can't just go open a bank account. We don't have our own insurance. We don't have a way of managing payroll. We don't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So switching fiscal sponsors is also a lot of work. Becoming our own 501c3 is also, so the time frame, the urgency that was conveyed in this article did not match the time that we would have to figure something else out. And so the conclusion that I came up with was, like as much as I hate swallowing this pill, San Francisco Parks Alliance actually has to be helped because we are San Francisco Parks Alliance. So that was the original, my personal original motivation. I know that must sound like, are you kidding? They totally betrayed you, which they did. But for survival, that was like, what had to happen. And so I talked to then CEO Robert Ogilvy, who had been brought in February to clean up everything and basically was like, how can I help? He connected me with Rashik Zarif, who's the other co-chair, and the two of us began to strategize. We brought together a few more people who were thinking along the same lines, that basically our survival is tied in with their survival. And the first thing we did is we wrote a letter to the board of directors of the San Francisco Parks Alliance, basically saying, like, you need to hold yourself accountable. You need to show us a plan of how you're going to write this, meet with us, engage with us in the process, um, and figure out how you're going to recoup the funds that no longer seem to be there that belong to us. So we had one meeting with the board chair, and it resulted in nothing. In the meantime, the district attorney started investigating, the city attorney started investigating. Mayor Lurie pulled all funds from that hadn't been doled out yet, city funds that hadn't been doled out yet that were to go to San Francisco Parks Alliance. And the organization swiftly closed, which meant that I was laid off, my staff was laid off, and we had no way of operating. In the meantime, I'd also initiated conversations with other fiscal sponsors. So basically, what happened is for about 2 weeks, I worked for free with my board, and we did everything we could to switch fiscal sponsors as quickly as possible. And we ended up going with Livable City. Um, in the meantime, we also began organizing the community partner network. So, off of the website, we got a list of all community partners who had been fiscally sponsored by San Francisco Parks Alliance, and we emailed them and we held a meeting. And this was, I think, mid-May was our first meeting. It was a Zoom meeting. We held our first in-person meeting on June 26th. And by that point, we had Sutro Stewards was up and running again, bruised and battered. I had to lay off a staff person. Um, but reopening our volunteer programs. At that point, the June 26th meeting with the rest of the community partner network, we had identified that our two main goals were one, to figure out how we could recoup our funds as quickly as possible, and two, find a home for the community partner network. So those two things kind of go hand in hand. If you don't have a place to put the money, then you can't really recoup your funds. But if you have no money, you can't really operate. So it's kind of this self-perpetuating like shitstorm, for lack of a better, excuse my French. Um, so what's been happening, I have not been moderating the chat, by the way, but I'll look at it as soon as I'm done, and I'm going to wrap up here in a second. Um, we've explored various ways of recouping our funds. The number that seems the most reliable that all community partners are owed, and this does not include San Francisco Rec and Park Department or the SF Port, is somewhere between 1.7 million and $2 million. Um, so San Francisco Parks Alliance has closed. They're going through a bankruptcy process that is a process that is sort of created for nonprofits. Um, there's a city attorney investigation, there's a district attorney investigation. The Board of Supervisors just called them in for a hearing in front of the Government Audit and Oversight Committee. So there's criminal prosecution is something that is being investigated, whether or not the board of San Francisco Parks Alliance and or its staff were criminally can be held criminally responsible for what happened. That is still a question. Um, there's a lot of talk of lawsuits. Can we form a class action lawsuit? So far, the big sort of deterrent to doing that is the length of time it would take. And also that according to all records that we've been able to have access to, there is no money. San Francisco Parks Alliance has no money. They closed with about $600,000 in liquid assets. $100,000 of that is going to go to the liquidator. And then total estimates of money owed is over $5 million. So everybody is, cents on the dollar we may receive. There's a thought of going after the board members individually or as a whole. There's a question about what kind of insurance did they have? So far, that has not been produced. The amount of, they call it D&O insurance, that's supposed to insure every board member. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that mechanism. We've heard they have insurance for 1 million. We've heard they have insurance for up to 2 million.
2 million.
So this is where we're at now. The quickest, most expedient way it seems to be able to recoup our funds is through private philanthropic endeavor. I'm going to just step back a moment and kind of why would donors want to come forth for us is a question that would come to my mind. Um, and I would just say that, I can wax poetic about the power of Sutro Stewards and what we do and how important it is. That's like my job, right? But if I'm stepping back and thinking about all the community groups and what we all do as a whole, I'm sure many of you in this room are involved in these sorts of public space projects. But I think something that's really unique that San Francisco Parks Alliance enabled, they did a bad job at it, but they did enable it, was the ability for neighbors to come together in their neighborhood and make positive change according to their vision in their neighborhood. And that's something that's really beautiful that all of San Francisco benefits from. I think it's one reason why we have such an amazing walkable city. We're blessed with natural beauty, but when um, community and neighbors come together and like get their hands in the dirt, put their hands on the land, as I like to say, design murals, clean up streets, activate business corridors. Um, these are small things, they install a public bench that, like fifth graders designed or whatever. Small things, but writ large, it has a really big impact for the feel of the city. And I think as a neighborhood council, like you value the unique character of every neighborhood, and this is something that the fiscal sponsorship program of the San Francisco Parks Alliance contributed to, was creating this unique culture and diversity and community empowerment per neighborhood. And that's something that can't be just let to dissolve, let alone the work that each group is doing. I mean, at this point, some groups have been able to find fiscal sponsors and continue their work, and many have not. Like at least 50% have not. So already, like the Glen Park Greenway and the Lakeside Landing and Bernal Hill Cinema, like already there's been impacts to these various programs and parks projects and public space projects. And so, if I were a donor in San Francisco, I would want to see this not die. Um, and the longer we're left inoperable, the harder, um, the more we have to rebuild. Because I'm sure you all know like how much so much of this work is relationships. So when you have a volunteer program, volunteers want to come back because they had a good time and they met their neighbors. And then, when you have a core group of volunteers who get to see each other every single Saturday or every other Saturday or one Saturday a month, they want to come back and see each other. So the longer that's left um, to sort of dissolve, the more time needs to be taken to build that up again. And so and the longer we go without our volunteer programs, the more the public space suffers because those are the volunteer programs that clean up the space and steward the gardens and repair the tiled steps and remove graffiti from the murals. So overall, there really is a lot at stake. Um, so I think I'll pause there and just kind of maybe I'll look at the chat a bit. Um, Ginsburg needs to be investigated. Okay. Yeah. And I know you probably know that the Jackie Fielder has called for an audit of the rec park department. Seems that many people are either lovers of Phil or haters of Phil. And I've had good experiences with him. We have at Sutro Stewards for the most part, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was something not untoward that happened. Um,
In 2021, Parks Alliance was also in trouble by receiving funds through Mohammed Nehru and Recology, and they were in deep trouble. But that kind of blew over. But what I want to know now, 4 years later, 5 years later, who was overseeing Parks Alliance? Was it Rec and Park, or was there some kind of financial institution put in charge? I can't believe they would have a problem and then they would go back to business as usual.
yeah, the so Drew Becker was the CEO that entire time. I think the question of what sort of oversight, like external oversight, was happening at Parks Alliance is a really good one that needs to be answered. Supposedly they did an annual audit. What the stance that Drew Becker took during the hearing that Supervisor Walton held for the Government Audit and Oversight Committee was, I knew nothing. And that's basically what the treasurer said as well. And Shaman's response, and that of all the three other supervisors there, was, how could you be CEO in charge of this organization and not know anything? And that's a fabulous question. I mean, I can say as an executive director of a small nonprofit, that I think the structure of nonprofits is a bit broken. I think it's inherited from the corporate structure, the structure where you have the on-the-ground workers and then you have the board. The board is responsible, like fiduciarily responsible for strategic direction and responsible for governance. And then here's the on-the-ground workers, like executing everything. And then you have the ED, the executive director, the CEO, who's manages the on-the-ground workers. And the ED is between both the board and the workers. And the ED reports to the board and shares what's happening on the ground. But the ED can, if the board is not active and not asking the right questions, the ED can paint any picture they want to paint, really, um, because of the way the nonprofit structures are. And that's a legal, that's 501(c)(3s legally. You must have a board of directors, you must have a treasurer, a secretary, and then probably there's some cultural inertia too of how we always do it. So I think, honestly, I think that's one thing that needs to be looked at. I think there should be more direct communication between the governing body and the on-the-ground workers. Drew said throughout the entire hearing that I sat through, 2.5 hours of, his whole line was, I had a finance team. And my finance team was dealing with that. Yeah, it was sometimes late. We got financial reports were late, but that was their responsibility. Um, so had the board been, Drew, well, this doesn't seem right, or talking directly to the finance team, maybe this would have come out sooner. The big problem, the big thing that SFPA did was they mingled restricted and unrestricted funds. So all the funds held by community groups, we had close to 200,000, were combined in the operating funds of San Francisco Parks Alliance. That's a big no-no. Like, how could you possibly do that? How could Drew allow that? And then how could the board then allow Drew to do that? So, yeah, it's a long-winded answer, but I hope that addresses.
Thanks a lot for this presentation. Having been both a board member and an executive director, I really, feel your pain, and I'm just very sorry that this whole mess occurred. I have kind of a wonky question, and I don't know if you can answer it, regarding liability. And, you said that there are lawsuits that are being considered a number of different ways, and there's directors and officers insurance and other issues. Is there any possibility of holding the city, as in Rec and Park?
Holding Rec and Park accountable?
Right. In other words, if you're going to file a lawsuit, they have very deep pockets, as opposed to, maybe trying to go after, if they're going for bankruptcy, you only get pennies on the dollar. And if the directors and officers insurance doesn't give more than 2 million and there's $3 million, you're not going to get your money. But if you went after Rec and Park legally, if somebody did, you would probably recover everything. But I don't know whether you guys have looked at that, and if so, whether you think there's a possibility you could do that.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Rec Park sees themselves as another victim. Like SFPA owes Rec Park somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million as well, because the way that the city, my view is that raising taxes is not popular, right? So parks need money to operate, and so there's a this private public partnership is created where Rec Park can, through a nonprofit, raise money for a park project. And so, like the tennis courts in Golden Gate Park is an example of that. There's lots of examples throughout the city. Um, and, Phil works his network, SF Parks Alliance works their network. The Tennis Coalition becomes a fiscally sponsored group that's fighting specifically for the rebuild of the tennis courts in Golden Gate Park. And that project in particular, I think they owe close to $1 million to Rec Park, essentially, money that was never spent, and should be in the account for that particular project. So um, people are pointing the finger at Rec Park, like, how could you have not known this? Like, what was going on here? Especially because of what happened with the Mohammed Nuru scandal. We know that SF Parks Alliance has been sort of a slush fund in the past. And so right now, the Rec Park is being audited. Jackie Fielder called for an audit. I'm not sure what the status of that is, like what they've found, if they found anything, if any of that is public. I actually haven't heard anything. But that seems like I don't think we could go off the top of my head. I don't think we could go after Rec Park as far as a lawsuit, but I think figuring out where they may be complicit or not is really important.
Over to you.
Okay, I just want to mention that there was some discussion about insurance. I think most boards of most nonprofits do cover insurance. And we found that rather odd that they had no idea how much insurance they have. But if they only owe a couple of $1 million, they seem to think they have at least that much insurance. And so it seems like they could definitely use some of their insurance funds to cover some of those debts, just to the people that they're holding their money. I think that would be who they're insuring
Mhm.
for. So I think that once we find out exactly how much insurance they have, we'll have a better idea of what kind of money could come out of that pocket, because that can be a deep pocket too. They seem at some point, I can't remember, one of the CEOs, I think it was, or the treasurer, I can't remember. They all seem to be equally unknowledgeable about what was going on in their organization. But at some point, one of them seemed to say it was at least 2 million, probably more.
Mhm.
So that would cover quite a bit. And it almost seems odd to me that we're going through this process instead of just, why don't we talk to the insurance companies? I mean, if there's damage, you go there first. Anyway, just my idea. Thank
Mhm.
you.
I believe the amount of the insurance was for $2 million.
CPN is organizing that San Francisco's Parks Alliance for the purpose of sponsorship.
If we are organizing an alternative to San Francisco Parks Alliance for fiscal sponsorship, I will answer that question because that's a good question. I'm not sure if it's what you asked. But as far as fiscal sponsorship, so one of our goals is to recoup our funds. The next goal is to help people find a home. So what we've been doing is interviewing fiscal sponsorship groups
Yeah,
and holding sort of open forums where, like, Zoom calls, they've been Zoom calls where people can come and ask questions. And so we've been trying to act as a facilitator for people to find groups. There is talk of, San Francisco Parks Alliance was a big organization that did a lot in the city. Again, they didn't do it well. We want to do it better than they did. But so there's a gap, there's a hole, there's a void where San Francisco Parks Alliance was. In its best form, they would ethically and responsibly and transparently and with accountability manage the finances of small neighborhood groups who, don't have the capacity to do it on their own. And they would act as an advocacy branch for parks and public space in San Francisco. Um, so we can, as the separate groups within the community partner network, find different fiscal sponsors. What I would like to see happen is that the community partner network stays together, even if we end up going to different fiscal sponsors. I think it's very powerful to have, I mean, you know this, you're part of a neighborhood coalition or coalition of neighborhoods. So the concept of, I mean, even following the model that you have, like maybe it's a 501(c)(4) organization, maybe all these neighborhood groups, these parks groups, friends of groups are in their own 501(c)(3), but we build a shared 501(c)(4) that can advocate for parks and open space in San Francisco. I think these are all questions that are not answered yet. They're ones that I'm really interested in. When I think about, just to say, when I think about the future of this work, what I want to see happen is I want to see the city facilitate and um, make it easier for neighborhood groups, neighbors to come together and do positive public space change in their neighborhood. I would like to see there be a streamlined process for applying for permits, for getting funding, for technical assistance, getting things up to code, proposals up to code of public space improvements that we want to make. I think those are ways the city can help. The city can fund more volunteer sort of partnership programs within the parks. So we need more community stewardship, not less community stewardship of our open space and our public space in San Francisco. And that's a place where the city can support us. Um, the way that I'm seeing the future unfold, ideally, is that we have a combination of philanthropic engagement, community activation, and then government support. I think those are the three sort of cadres that need to come together and work together towards making the community partner network whole in the short term, and then making sure we can continue to do our work in the long term, and that other groups can be formed easily as San Francisco moves into the 21st century. So that's what I want to see happen. I'll put my email address in the chat. My organization is sutrostewards.org if you're interested. And yeah, if you have ideas for other fiscal sponsors, that would be great. I think I also might want to get in touch with you to kind of pick your brains about what, like the structure that you have in place and how you work with different neighborhood groups, because we might want to do something similar.
501(c)(4), yes.
And so you cannot fiscally sponsor other groups.
We wouldn't be able to sponsor 501(c)(3), no.
Okay.
You need
Okay.
another 501(c)(3) to do
Yeah.
that.
That's what I thought. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks, everyone.